Hey everybody, it's Raisins here. If you're watching this video, you've probably seen or at least heard of Mekkah's Fire Emblem 7 draft race, which I raced with him as well as Castle and JustinJamesMDLC. You might recognize him for a couple other of Mekkah's videos, but I'm just here to do a follow-up to the draft race because as I was looking through the comment section, I noticed a very common trend was a lot of people didn't really understand the picks that we were doing. Not in a way that they were mistaken or had bad ideas, but they expressly stated themselves that the picks we were making did not make sense. But they do make sense, believe me. They're very strong picks, and they're very smart picks and intelligent picks. And they do clearly work. Like, we have evidence because the times that we achieved in the draft races were faster than anything that had been done before. So I just wanted to make this follow-up video to say, you know, you're right to be confused, because a lot of the things that we did are not typical of Fire Emblem play. But because of the nature of the format, they are reasonable choices, and I wanted to make this video to explain to them, and explain to you in particular, why these picks were reasonable and why we picked them. And hopefully after this video you gain like a slightly better understanding of the fe7 draft meta. As it exists today, it'll probably change some time from now, in the same way that, you know, our draft meta right now looks way different than it was a year ago. A year from now the meta will be very different. And I just wanted to do this video in like kind of one take. I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time on it. I don't want to spend more than 30 minutes. So this should be a quick video where I just explain most of the picks and most of the ideas behind it. So one thing before I get into this is that if you want to have the most effective understanding of a draft meta or of a draft race, you're going to need to do two things. For one, you're going to need to read and understand the rules in full. And secondly, you need to understand the maps that you're playing. Now, if you just want a very basic level understanding, you can skip these steps, and I'll give you a little timestamp right here that you can go to in the video if you just want to get into the picks. But I really can't emphasize enough, if you want to be good at a draft race format, you absolutely must understand the rules inside and out, and I will be referring to the rules as I go through. So go ahead and read the paste bin. It's a bit dry, and if you get disinterested halfway through, just come back to the video. And secondly, you need to understand the maps, because Fire Emblem is a strategy game, which means there are two components. There are problems you need to solve, and there are tools with which to solve the problems. And there's no point evaluating the tools that you have if you don't know the problems that you need to solve. And a lot of people, when they looked at our picks, were like, hey, why is Fiora or Farina or Kent or Sane not being picked early? And a lot of people said, hey, like, these characters are really good, they solve a lot of problems, but the issue is that they solve problems that don't need to be solved. Most of the maps that we need to do, if you just like know where the reinforcement zones are or know where the main objectives are, you can do them with just Hector or with just Hawkeye or with just any other unit. So that's you need to understand the maps and understand the triggers, and frankly a lot of what we do is just knowing the bare minimum of what we need to do in a map, and then we can get through it quickly. So without much further ado, I want to just go ahead and get into the picks. I think this is now a fine place to timestamp the video and get into it. So when we rolled the orders, we rolled it, and Mekkah got in first position, I got in second position, Justin got in third position, Castle got in fourth position. If you've read the rules by now, you know the gist. We were playing on Hector normal mode. All the guidance are optional. It's just whoever gets to the fire dragon the fastest, and we're going to pick 1, 2, 3, 4, or 3, 2, 1. And pardon if you can hear the mouse, you're just gonna have to deal with it. So Mekkah had the first pick, and he decided to pick Heath. So what do you want to do with your first pick? With your first pick, you want to pick a unit whom we call the carry. And essentially what the carry does is they're the one who's doing most of your combat. They're the one who's doing all of your late game objectives. They're the ones who are winning maps for you. In this case, Heath is a strong pick, and he is, in our mind and in our meta, the first pick, first position carry, because he does all these things really well. He one-shots most enemies when he fights them. Like, he has a lot of strength, he has a lot of speed. So anytime he gets into combat with an enemy, he's going to one-round them, even possibly one-shot them. And this is really important because a combat in Fire Emblem 7 with the animations off takes like 5 to 6 seconds. And if you get in combat with a unit and you don't kill them, that's 5 to 6 seconds that you just spent not advancing the map. You're no closer to completing the map than you were before. And if you make a habit of doing that, like if you do that 10 times, it's literally an entire minute you've added up just by doing useless combat animations. And Heath doesn't do that very often. Heath has enormous strength, he has great speed, he crits very often because enemies in fe7 have 0 luck. So Heath is just really good at that. In addition, he has a very easy training arc. You pick him up on chapter 22, and then you don't really train him at all. You do a bunch on chapter 23, and he gets to level 11-ish or 12-ish. You don't really do much except buy stuff on chapter 24, and then on chapter 25, you can train him all the way up to 18, 19, sometimes even 20, and then just promote him on chapter 26, and from there you're sailing. In addition, he's one of the 2 flyers, Florina being the other one, who can carry a promoted Hector. This is going to be important for Victory of Death, and it's going to be a reason why Florina and Farina are not going to be picked, or are not going to be valued very highly later because they cannot carry promoted Hector. So that's why Heath has been our first pick, first position. He's very easy to train, he's very powerful, he can carry promoted Hector, he can solve the maps. This whole issue of low speed doesn't really exist because once you give him a few levels, he gets past that problem. And his low resistance matters in 1 map Sands of Time. One additional thing about Heath, by the way, is that he is the only of the... Well, he can do something that Florina can't do, and that is he can one-round Denning with a Silver Lance. Florina can pretty much never one-round Denning. Denning is the boss of Sands of Time. And reinforcements on that map spawn every single turn, on turn 1 and on turn 3 and then on turn 4. I think, and if you fail to kill him, there's just going to be more enemies on that map. And remember, if there's 6 enemies that spawn, you might say, oh, whatever. But 6 enemies, and then you have to fight them, that's 36 to 40 seconds that you're just losing, and you didn't need to if you just killed Denning earlier. So the fact that Heath can kill Denning earlier is just a huge boon. He does great against Stella, who's another boss you can struggle against. But enough about Heath, he just does literally everything, he's easy to train. Now, one downside to Heath that you might think is like really grave is that he joins quote-unquote late, and it's like, oh, well, you're just going to be soloing with Hector until then. That's actually ideal, because like if you're trying to complete the game as fast as possible and you could beat every single chapter reliably with just Hector, you would, because you just move 1 unit, the player phase ends because you've moved your 1 unit, all the enemies run into Hector and die and get 1 shot, and then your player phase begins and you just move Hector again and the enemy phase begins again. Like, if you could do that, you would. And frankly, you can do that and pretty much get away with it up through about chapter 21 or 22, which is where Heath joins. It's very convenient. So I remember there was one comment who was like, in Mekkah's chat stream, it was like, how was Raisins in the lead? Didn't you have to Hector solo the whole early game? Yeah, I was in the lead, not because I had to Hector solo, but because I got to Hector solo. Like, I had the opportunity to because I wasn't training up a unit in the early game, like Florina, or like Fiora, or like Kentersane. And once we get to other units later, you'll see, like, training up units in the early game sets you behind. Or having strong early games sets you behind. It does not make you go faster, because Hector is already fast. But enough about Heath, but thankfully, I've talked a lot about Heath, but a lot of the ideas will also apply to Hawkeye, who was my pick. So I was the 2nd position pick. And in 2nd position, I decided to choose Hawkeye as my first pick. Hawkeye is good for many of the same reasons Heath is. He's dummy thick, he doesn't die. He very frequently one-shots enemies because he has plus 15 crit and a billion strength. So remember what I was saying earlier about one-rounding enemies is good? Hawkeye literally always one-rounds enemies, and he very often one-shots enemies. Which you might say, oh, what's the big deal with one-shotting enemies? Well, if you make a habit of one-shotting enemies, that can save you several minutes over the course of a run. The very evident downside to Hawkeye over Heath is that he can't fly, and you might say, like, oh, why is Hawkeye so good? He can't fly. Well, name me a map where you really need to fly, right? You might say something like Cog of Destiny. Cog of Destiny, the way you beat that map quickly is by avoiding all the reinforcement zones and killing enemies every single time you fight them, right? Like, Cog of Destiny in casual play is this super long, drawn-out reinforcement fest of a million billion units. But in speedrun, if you just avoid the reinforcement zones, which any unit with 8 move can do, and Hawkeye will have the boots by that point, so he can do that, then you just need to kill the units on the map. So it's a matter of how quickly can you kill the 37-ish units, I think it's 37 units who start on the map, and Hawkeye can kill them very quickly. You just move to the top, kill all the guys up there, move to the bottom, kill all the guys up there, down there, move to the center zone, kill the 3 snipers and the 2 Myrmidons, and then you, by that point, Veda spawns, and you've blocked off for other reinforcements, so Veda just picks up a Sword Reaver, gives it to Hawkeye, and then Hawkeye's Sword Reaver's down minus. The map is really quick. Victory or death, you might say, oh crap, you really need a flyer for Victory of Death. Not true. If you watch my strat, and even, I think Don made a better video showcasing the strategy, Hawkeye can actually get through that map very quickly because he has low chance of death, and he can still avoid a lot of the combat. So he's a great choice for that map. Again, I'm spending the most time talking about the carries because these are the units who are going to be doing like 95% of the combat. Ideally, you don't want one of your scrub units who's going to be picked later doing the combat because they're unlikely to kill, they're likely to just waste time. Anytime you take an action with one of these other units, it wastes time, but when you take an action with your strongest unit, it completes the map more quickly. So that's why I'm talking so much about this. So the first 2 carries were Heath and Hawkeye, and this was pretty much expected among us, because again, they complete the maps very quickly, they one-shot enemies. So now it's Justin's pick. And between us, there are 2 real carries that you can pick. And these are just the options. He didn't actually pick Florina. There's Florina, and there's some kind of ground-based carry. One of these 3, probably in this order of reliability. So Justin had tried Florina, and he tried some of the ground-based carries, and he was more comfortable with a ground-based carry. The problem with a ground-based carry is that you need to have Pent in order for them to work. Specifically for Victory of Death, you need the Victory or Death, you need the Warp Staff. It helps out a lot in Sands of Time too, so you need Pent. So what he did is he actually first picked Pent. And the idea with first pick Pent is Castle's going to pick, and he can't pick a ground-based carry because ground-based carries need Pent. So he's going to pick Florina. And then there's 2 characters that Justin is comfortable with. It doesn't matter what Castle picks, he's going to get one of them. So that's exactly what he did. He picked Pent. Castle picked Florina. And now's the time to talk about Florina. I've discussed Heath in depth, I've discussed Hawkeye in depth. I'm going to wait to discuss Justin's in depth because he needs a pair. So now I'm going to do Florina. So Florina and Heath are very similar. They just solve the same amounts of problems. Basically, there are a couple maps where Florina helps. Basically, Florina is Heath, except she saves time on a couple more maps, specifically 22 and 23. So she saves time on the Eubens map because she can clear it out very quickly. She saves time in the desert map because she can go out and kill enemies. Remember, that's a route map. And frankly, on the desert map, your main strategy is just to let Pent, the green unit, kill everything. One problem with letting Pent, the green unit, kill everything is that sometimes Pent, the green unit, gets injured and runs away to heal and gets stuck because he's not aggressive. He attacks anything that's in his range, but sometimes he just gets stuck in the corner. So with Florina, actually, you fly over, you pick up Pent, and then you drop him next to the enemies to give him the right idea and have him get back in the fight. So Florina helps out with a couple more maps than Heath can help out with. The cost is her training is much more expensive. You really have to babysit her during 16, you really have to babysit her during 17. I think even during chapter 18, currently our group, the strat is to, like, everyone else just runs Hector at Zoldom on chapter 18. That's the one on the boat with the shaman with the Luna. Everyone else just, says, hey, balls out, give Hector a bunch of hand axes and run him at Zoldom. If Zoldom crits him, who cares? That strategy takes like 50 seconds to do, so who cares if you reset? Just do it. And if you reset, who cares? The whole strategy takes an expected minute and a half to perform. Florina, on the other hand, if you have Florina, you really want to train her by actually doing the defend condition on that map. So you literally sit still on that map, and you feed Florina all the XP. And this is strength that she uses to save you time that Heath can't save, but you've invested time that you didn't need to invest time into for Heath. So Don151, who also helped us with strategies, actually considers Florina to be better than Heath because he's better at training her. He has very reliable strats for training her. I don't know if there are any maps that he can solve that we can't with Florina. but because his training costs less time, he values Florina more highly than Heath. But Castle here picked Florina, and he's very comfortable with Florina. He was the one who, like, really led the way and developed strats for training her and training her reliably. So he picked Florina. And this is the end of the first round picks, so we've already seen Mekkah is going to use Heath as his carry. I'm going to use Hawkeye. Justin's going to use a ground-based carry, and Castle's going to use Florina. So now we're into the second round picks. What you usually want to do in the second round picks, this is a good time to do denials. Also, if there's a very strong utility or secondary carry, this is a good time to pick them. As exactly what is a secondary carry? A secondary carry is any unit who acts as a carry on a small number of maps. I'm pretty much the only one who's... Well, Castle will pick them too, but I'm going to pick them as well. Castle's going to pick Oswin though, so I want to talk about Oswin as a pick. Oswin ends up being a secondary carry for a lot of early game. I mentioned before how if you, like when I was talking about Heath and Hawkeye, if you could Hector solo the entire game, you would. And Oswin is basically just a Hector who can solo a few more maps than Hector can, which is why you pick him here. Like, Chapter 17 becomes dummy easy when you have Oswin. Chapters 11 through 15 don't really become any easier. Frankly, all of us have really reliable strats for Chapters 11 through 15 that don't require Oswin. And it's usually around Chapter 17, which is a pretty dicey map, that you start to deploy Oswin. And he just takes off. Like, the man doesn't die. He one-shots practically everything he hits. He's the easiest unit in the entire world to use. So you just deploy him and he wins, which is why Castle decided to pair him with a frail and delicate and a difficult to use unit like Florina. If you have this very delicate strategy that has a lot of potential to go wrong, Castle's idea was it's very good to pair her with a unit who is difficult to misuse. And that's exactly what he did with Oswin. Like, literally you can't fail with Oswin. So he did that to help him train up Florina, and the strategy actually worked. It took him a while to train and catch up. Remember, there was that one time when someone was like, how was... like, there was that one time when someone was like, how was Raisins in the lead? He had to Hector solo through the early game. Yeah, Castle was using that time to train Florina. And I think around the time I just started Chapter 25, and Castle just started Chapter, 23? And I think he managed to do 23 and 24 before I even completed 25. So, and at that point he was actually gaining more speed because his Florina was moving as fast as, if not faster than, my Hawkeye. So Castle was the one, he got slingshot from like 4th place to 1st place all of a sudden, and I actually had to catch up to him because his Florina was moving so fast. So that's the idea there. Now we get to Justin. And Justin here has essentially 2 ground-based carries left, either Lowen or Eliwood. Except he didn't practice with Eliwood, so he picks Lowen. And Lowen is essentially... Again, what's the idea of a ground-based carry? Or just of a carry in general? You have them do all your combat, and you have them complete all your main objectives. So how well does Lowen perform in those regards? Well, Lowen, like Oswin, literally doesn't die. He has a ton of defense. His resistance is kind of sus, but magic attackers in Hector normal mode are really bad. So that actually doesn't matter. And he moves through the maps pretty good. He has 8 movement, so he can do Battle Before Dawn fine. We have a very reliable Battle Before Dawn strat that kills Ursula on turn 4. And if you get to turn 4 and Jafar is still alive, and you kill Ursula, there's literally a 0% chance that Zephiel dies. So Lowen is really good for that map, and he can pull it off. Pretty much any unit with 8 move can pull it off. But Lowen is the best for this. Now, why is a unit like Kenter Sane not there for that? Well, Lowen is easier to train. He joins earlier, and there are more maps on which you can train him. So it's easier to get him to that level. You're not... Remember, when you have an early game unit, you're not using them to speed up your early game. You're slowing down your early game to train them so that you get your late game carry faster. And this is exactly what Justin did with Lowen. He spent some time... His Hector and his Lowen got a little bit RNG screwed, which is what I attribute to him, you know, getting 4th place for. And you got to remember, even though Justin got last place in the race, this doesn't mean he's an unskilled player by any means. His Lowen and his Hector were both really RNG screwed, and he still got a time of 3 hours and 3 minutes, which was faster than any televised race had ever gotten up to that point. So he's still a good player. He got a bit RNG screwed. And this is something that I do want to mention about Lowen, is it's really easy, really easy for him to get RNG screwed. He has kind of a bad growth in strength and speed. and it's really easy for him to not meet benchmarks. There are a few key benchmarks, like if you want to kill Lloyd in 2 shots, you need, I think, 15 strength. And it's actually pretty easy for Lowen to not have that. If you want to double Zoldam, you need 9 speed. If you want to knock a double by Uha, you need 9 speed. If you want to double Oleg, you need 11 speed. And it's actually really easy for Lowen to fail to meet those benchmarks. I think when he was going into the Ursula map, his Lowen was missing a few key benchmarks. Like, he was short on a lot of stats, and Justin knew the risk of this going in, but he was still more comfortable with Lowen than he was with Eliwood, because Lowen is just easier to train and easier to use. Okay, so at this point, pretty much everyone has picked their carry. Castle's the other one who's picked a non-carry unit. And again, Justin picked Pent because you need a Warp Staff for victory or death. And now it's back to my pick. So I have Hawkeye. My current game plan is use Hector to solo the entire game up until I get Hawkeye, and then use Hawkeye to solo the game from there. So my thought was, what's the most difficult chapter? Well, the chapters tend to get more difficult the closer I am to reaching Hawkeye. So let me draft a character who helps me in those last few maps I have to do with Hector right before Hawkeye. So I chose Isadora. So if you have an idea, again, I'm Hector soloing on maps on chapters 11 through 22. And on chapter 23, I get Hawkeye. Chapter 22 is actually really hard to do with Hector because there's a lot going on. There are a lot of combats. And when I was doing my practice, I actually decided to try and strat out just a very easy, I think it's a 4-turn clear with Isadora. Basically, I stratted out a clear for chapter 22 that takes 4 minutes, 20 seconds, nice. Has about an 82% chance of success. And all you need is Isadora. Like, Isadora and the free units can do the strats, and the free units at that time are Isadora, Hector, and Ninian. And that's all you need to pull it off. So that's exactly what I did. I picked Isadora, and then I did the strat. And essentially what Isadora does is she takes care of the most difficult map that I have to do. So this is sort of an idea to take away in draft racing philosophy is, between Hector and Hawkeye, I basically have everything I need to solve 95% of the problems in the game. So now I need to look at the remaining 5%. What are the things I haven't solved yet? Okay, well, I don't have an easy way to get through chapter 22. Cool. Another thing that Isadora does is Crazed Beast. Hector and Hawkeye really want to go to the top fort, the top left fort with Pascal, and then the top right fort with the monks. And the question is, who's going to deal with the bottom left fort? Isadora is really good at that. Isadora at base with the Silver Sword. Actually, a lot of units at base with the Silver Sword can do that. So that's exactly what I did. Basically, remember what I said at the start. You have to understand the maps. There's no point evaluating your tools if you don't know the challenges you have to overcome. And after I knew that I had Hector and Hawkeye, I looked at the challenges I still had to do. And I said, chapters 22 and chapters 25 are going to be difficult. Let me pick up Isadora because she's really good at those 2 maps. And this is kind of the philosophy we have to go with for the rest of the game. Okay, so now we've made it all the way back, and we're back to Mekkah. So Mekkah here, when he did his picks, and I actually had to pull up the picture here just to find out, he picked, confusing the entire audience, Dorcas and Matthew. And this is where, so basically these picks right here are like carries. Isadora and Oswin are kind of a secondary carry. From here through probably the 6th or 7th round are just random utility picks. So it'll be easier to explain the utility, and then in like the 8th and 9th round, it doesn't matter actually, like those characters are just garbage. I don't even use them. But we draft them anyway because rules are rules. So Dorcas is pretty simple. Basically, one thing Dorcas does is he picks up Marcus on chapter 13. On chapter 13, you want to walk across the river with Hector and then send Hector to the throne. But Hector's kind of weak at combat, so you put Marcus with him. Dorcas is the one who picks up Marcus, and then on turn 3, he gives Marcus to Hector, and then Hector moves 1 square left and drops Marcus over. So the only units able to do that are Dorcas, Lawin, Oswin, and Bartray. Bartray is the only other unit you have there who can do that. And Mekkah at the time favored Dorcas. He said, hey, Dorcas is the best, and anytime I might need another unit later for other maps, remember, you can only deploy your unit in future maps if you have them drafted. And there are some maps like Chapter 17 and Chapter 20 where you just need a unit to do some things. In Chapter 17, you want to block the reinforcements in the bottom left. In Chapter 20, you want to kill the sniper in the bottom left. And block the reinforcements if need be. And Mekkah decided Dorcas was the best for those roles. Now, one key thing about Dorcas, and the reason you don't train him up too much, is because on Chapter 27, you have a route split between Kenneth and Jeremy map. The Kenneth map is a pretty straightforward Seize Throne map, and the Jeremy map is a very wide and spread out route map. So of course you want to go Kenneth route. If your Hero Crest units that are Dorcas, Bartray, Guy, and Raven, if they have more XP, not greater than or equal to, if they have more XP than your Guiding Ring units, Urk, Sarah, Lucius, and Priscilla, then you go to the Jeremy map. What that means is on Chapter 26, if Dorcas, Bartray, and Guy or Raven have any amount of XP, you deploy them on 26 and you kill them off. That way you go to the Kenneth map. So this is why you don't really train Dorcas up a whole lot. He ends up doing a few small things. He gives Marcus to Hector that saves like a minute and a half. He does flunky things on Chapter 17, blocking reinforcements that saves like 2 minutes. So already he's actually doing a lot just by existing. In fact, he probably doesn't even issue a single attack all game and he's still fine. Matthew, on the other hand, so Matthew does pretty much one thing and one thing only. He steals the Speedwing in Chapter 18 and gives it to Heath. And that's literally it. I want to talk now, like, while I'm here on Matthew, Matthew falls in a special case of utility that's like risk mitigation. Essentially, like, when we're doing these strats, we end up cutting a lot of corners. Like, the reason that we're able to move so quickly is because we skip a lot of crap. We skip a lot of training. We concentrate our XP on a few units, and those units have weaknesses like RNG screw. Matthew is a class of unit who doesn't unlock any new strategies. You can't do anything new with him. If you draft Matthew, you're still Hector soloing until you get to Heath. But Matthew can give you a Speedwing, and that one Speedwing protects you against bad cases of RNG screw. Like, maybe Hector gets RNG screwed on the way to Heath. I've seen it before where Hector has like 7 speed or 8 speed at level 20, and it's really hard for him to get to Heath. So you just steal the Speedwing with Matthew, you give it to Hector, and now he passes those benchmarks. Basically the idea with Matthew is, if your Hector sucks, you give a Speedwing to Hector. If your Hector's doing fine, great, your Hector's doing fine. You get Heath, you give the Speedwing to Heath, and you're smooth sailing from there. So that's literally Matthew's only impact. You can only do that if you draft Matthew, otherwise you're incurring like 20 minutes of penalty. So that's that. So Matthew is a risk mitigation pick, and so is the one that I picked here, which is Ellie Wood. So I picked Ellie Wood, which shocks the audience. Everyone was like, Ellie good, like, oh, this guy's got balls picking Ellie Wood this early. It's not the case. This is actually a reasonable pick. I wasn't memeing on people. I wasn't trying to show off or anything. Like, Ellie Wood is actually good. So there are two things Ellie Wood can do. For one, he can actually be a carry. As it turns out, 7 move and a promotion at Chapter 26 is reasonable. You might say like, oh, that's such a late promotion. Chapter 26 is the same chapter that Heath promotes. Like, do I need to say any more? Heath promotes at Chapter 26. Ellie Wood promotes at Chapter 26 at level 20. They have comparable stats there. In fact, Ellie Wood probably has better stats than Heath. You might say, oh, he doesn't have 8 move. Show me the chapter that requires 8 move. We actually, on Battle Before Dawn, I have a semi-reliable strat. It requires a couple extra pieces that I did draft later, but there's a semi-reliable strat that where Ellie Wood can get to Ursula on turn 4 and kill her. Same as Heath, same as Florina, same as Lowen. So, like, Ellie Wood as a late game carry is actually completely viable. If anything, he might be better than some of these other ones. But the reason I picked him is not because I wanted to use him as late game carry. If I got to use him as late game carry, that's excellent. But I wanted to pick him as a sort of training wheels insurance against Hector. Basically, like I said, I'm Hector soloing until Hawkeye. If my Hector sucks, this plan might not work. So what I'm going to do is, when I get Ellie Wood, I'm going to train Hector and Ellie Wood together. If Hector ends up being fine, great, I ditch Ellie Wood and just continue on with the plan A. If Hector sucks, it's also fine because I've been training Ellie Wood, so maybe Ellie Wood can do what Hector was supposed to do in the meantime. Or Ellie Wood can provide his support to Hector, which takes like 4 turns to build for the first one, and then I think 30-ish turns to build for the second one. It's really fast, and it's actually quite impactful. So that was the strategy here. Like, I've identified a problem. Again, like, this was one, I've identified a problem. It was chapter 22 and chapter 25. And in this one, I've identified a problem with my strategy, is that I'm really taking a risk by using only Hector, so let me use another unit who could potentially hedge against that risk. And it ended up working. My Hector had good stats, so I ditched Eliwood around chapter 14, and never really saw him again. And I went on to win the race, so, you know, clearly it worked. This was not a mean pick. This was actually a strong pick. Okay, continuing on. So, on the topic of meme picks, this was not a meme pick. It looked very strange. But Justin in this position picked Vida. So, again, my philosophy here was, alright, my game plan is Hector into Hawkeye, that finishes the game, except for a few problems. For those few problems, I use Isadora and Eliwood to patch it up. Justin was using the same logic. Hector and Lowen is pretty freaking good. Like, yeah, you might miss some benchmarks, but even crappy Hector and crappy Lowen, which he had both of, is still pretty good. And remember, he beat the game in 3 hours with crappy Hector and crappy Lowen. What he needed was a slight boost on Victory or Death. The Victory or Death strats with Pent and Lowen were actually like still kind of jank. Justin actually discovered a strat that you basically, from Victory or Death, you warp once into the north, and then you pick up Pent with Veda, fly Pent to the north. And the reason that you don't do like Veda carrying Hector is because Veda can't carry Hector. I think only Lowen can carry Hector. Actually, in fact, maybe Lowen can't carry Hector, but either way, you warp Lowen and Hector north. So they're in the north side of the map. Veda and Pent are in the south. Veda picks up Pent, moves Pent to the north, and then Pent will warp them a second time into Limstella's zone. And in order to pull off that strat, Justin needed Veda. Veda is the easiest to recruit. The only other people who can pull off the strat are Fiora or Farna, and both of them are hard to recruit. So he decided against that. Speaking of which, I might as well speak about Fiora and Farna. So again, why are these guys not late game, not these great first pick late game carries? Well, they can't carry Hector. So they might as well be like an Arcanea flyer because they can't really do all those things. Again, like, what are the Seas maps? Victory or Death. Pale Flower of Darkness. But Pale Flower of Darkness, you're so slowed down that you might as well just walk Hector there anyway. Like, there's no point rescuing. And before that, Dragon's Gate. Like, there are so few Seas maps that why would you need to rescue Hector? Except in Victory or Death. And these girls can't rescue Hector in Victory or Death. Furthermore, they have very difficult recruitments. You just want to beat Crazy Beast before Farna even shows up. You just want Fiora to die in Chapter 18 because Chapter 19. Chapter 19 is really difficult. The best strategy is just to bunga Uhai and hope it works. And if you add another moving piece, which is Fiora and training her and keeping her alive, it's not only adding extra risk, but it's making your regular attempts longer, so if you reset because Hector got crit by Uhai, it's even more costly, so it's just so expensive. Justin actually discovered a better way to rescue and train Fiora, or rather just recruit her, and he ended up using it, but she's not a carry. So, in any case, let me go back on to the regular picks. So what was the next pick? Castle had 2 here. And he picked more utility picks. Again, pretty much everything Dork has and Beyond is just utility picks. And he picked Urk and Lyn. So these are not troll picks. Urk is another utility pick similar to Matthew. He just hedges your risk. What does he do? So Urk joins with the Goddess icon. And the only way you can get this Goddess icon, there are 3 ways. You either draft Urk, at which point you can deploy Sarah and talk to Urk. You draft Sarah, at which point you can deploy Sarah and talk to Urk. Or you can visit the village in the south, recruit Priscilla, then walk Priscilla all the way to the top of the map and talk to Urk. The third way takes so long, and numbers 1 and 2 require you to draft Urk or Sarah. Again, this is something where you really need to have read the rules. You cannot deploy a unit unless you've drafted them, or they can recruit a drafted unit using the talk command. So there was no way to get Urk's Goddess icon. Oh wait, sorry, number 3, you don't actually have to have Priscilla talk to Urk. You just get the village. But even then, even just getting the village is too long. You complete the chapter before you even get the village. So, in order to even recruit Urk, you need to draft him. In addition, drafting Urk makes it easier to get Priscilla. Again, a secondary recruitment condition for Priscilla is that you just have Urk. So anyone who drafts Urk or Priscilla and then recruits, anyone who drafts Urk or Sarah and then recruits Urk just automatically gets Priscilla. And that's the easiest way to recruit her. If you draft Priscilla, but you don't draft Urk or Sarah, you basically can't recruit this unit. So he gets this for the Goddess icon. Urk is kind of a doo-doo combat unit. There are a few attacks he can do that are meaningful, but he'll probably cast his Thunder Spell like 4 times at most in the entire game. Lynn, on the other hand, is not garbage. She is probably the best flunky in the entire game. And when I say flunky, I just mean a combat unit who does combat unit things. There are a few situations in the game where there's just one random enemy or one random group of enemies that you just need to kill. Good examples are the nomads, the nomad reinforcements in Chapter 17, the sniper in Chapter 20, and the entire bottom section of the map in Chapter 25. Lynn, at base of the Manicotti, can deal with all of those. She destroys the nomads in 17, just completely one-rounds them, bam, they're done. She 2-rounds the sniper at base, and she destroys the entire bottom half. She has, like, literally Lynn with her base stats on Chapter 25 can deal with the entire south side of the map and faces, I think, a 20% chance to die at base. Like, she is insanely good. So Castle is not memeing around when he picks Lynn. He knows exactly what he's doing, and he's identifying his strat. Hey, what's a difficult map for me? Well, like, I need some combat in Chapter 17 because Chapter 17 is where I'm training Florina, and Osmond's occupied, so Urk and Lynn can just go to the bottom left and smack nomads. I also have a very reliable strat against the sniper, cool. And I have a solution to the bottom for it in Chapter 25. So he's identifying what are the chapters that are difficult for him, and then he's picking a unit that deals with that. So really smart pick from Castle. Alright, on to the next pick. What did Justin pick? Sarah, for the same reason as Urk, he just wants the Goddess icon. The only difference is that Urk can attack a few times and Sarah can't. Do you ever use the healing staff? In my opinion, I use Sarah's healing staff if you have Elliewood, that's it. Okay, cool. Again, like, very quick utility picks. I here picked Bartray, so now we're back to my pick. Bartray does a lot of the same things that Dorcas does. He rescues Marcus in Chapter 13, he acts as a flunky. I actually value Bartray higher than Dorcas, the reason being that Bartray with the Steel Axe can one-shot snags, and Dorcas can't. This ended up being really relevant, because in Chapter 24, I needed to deploy a lot of people to buy items, including hand axes, because I forgot to do so in Chapter 16, because I'm an idiot. And the fact that Bartray could one-shot snags with the Steel Axe was, like, very relevant there. So, Bartray was the pick there. Just some utility. And we're on to the next round. So this is where Mekkah stole Christmas. He picked both Christmas caps. And this is a small utility pick. This is not... So... Again, what's the idea here? Remember how I said these units are good because you just want to Hector solo? Like, units in early game don't speed you up. They slow you down. This is why units like Kent and Sane are generally considered to be not that good. Their stats are kind of trash. I recall, like, old training strategies would get Kent and Sane to Chapter 19, and then you'd promote them to Paladin, and Sane would have, like, 9 strength and 9 speed, or something ridiculous like that. Like, their stats just suck. They're not carry material. Investing into them detracts so much. Like, Mekkah's game plan is Hector into Heath. Where do these units fit in? They don't fit in the early game. There's no real early game strat that requires Kent or Sane. Chapter 16 is fastest if you just solo it with Hector. Chapter 18 is fastest if you just solo it with Hector. Same with 19, same with 20, same with 21. One thing these units can do, to their credit, is there were a few strats in particular in chapters 25 and in Battle Before Dawn, which is chapter 28. Yes, 28. That require a unit that has 7 move and Canto, or in some cases 8 move and Canto, and these units are actually fine. Remember how I was talking about flunky stuff and what Lynn can do against, like, nomads and snipers? Kent can do that too, and he can get to level 10 and then promote, and now you have a unit who has 8 move and Canto. In particular in chapter 25, this is useful because, like, say There's a reinforcement zone on Chapter 25 outside the forts that if you enter, 3 cabs will spawn in the forts at the end of every single enemy phase. That is so annoying. If you lurk an 8-move unit outside that reinforcement zone, you like sit in a square north of a forest. You can move 8 tiles and then drop Hector onto a fort, and at that point it doesn't even matter if the unit lives. You're on the fort line, you're past it. So that's usually a strat. I don't think Mekkah did the strat. I can't remember, but he knows how to do it. And he sees a lot of value in it. In fact, I think he did do that because he trained Heath on that map. So he kind of got slowed down. Like, if I had to criticize anything with Mekkah's strat, it's that he used these Cavaliers in the early game, and that does nothing but slow you down. Like, what are you training these units for? Just train one of them, train Kent. Kent gets to level 10, fine. And then later on, if you need a level 7 or a 7-move unit with Kanto, you have Sane. So he kind of took both of them away. It was a very spectacular moment, but objectively you have to criticize it as like kind of a poor move. Let's see, and then, so he stole Christmas, he took the Cavs. It wasn't really that big, and now I picked a know the rules unit. I picked Wallace. So, again, think back to the start of the video. I said you need to know the rules. Alright, like read the rules. You cannot deploy a unit unless you have drafted them, or if that unit recruits a drafted unit with the Talk command. What Wallace does when you draft him, you literally never recruit this guy. In fact, I think it's been years since I've recruited Wallace. You literally never recruit Wallace. Instead, on Chapter 24, which is a very delicate chapter, with a kill on Lloyd that requires a lot of trading and a lot of shopping and a lot of convoy warping. Right, like the strategy to kill Lloyd is basically you draw him over on turn 1, and then on turn 2 you do this big convoy warp chain where you buy a Sword Reaver, and then you pull it out of Merlinus' tent, and then you give it to someone, and then that someone gives it to Hector. And it's this whole ordeal. And I also needed to buy hand axes on that map. So if you draft Wallace, you get to deploy Florina, Kent, Sane, Will, and Lynn to do all that crap I was just talking about. That is insane value. Drafting Wallace literally gives you 5 units on the most like delicate and action-heavy map and time-pressured map of the entire game. That's why the Wallace pick here was good. And I used those units. I used them to buy Sword Reavers and to buy hand axes. Like, you can watch my Chapter 24 clear. That's exactly what I used the Wallace pick for. I never recruited the guy. But you deploy all these units who can talk to Wallace because, you know, I deploy them to quote-unquote talk to Wallace. But I don't talk to Wallace. I just do other stuff with them. That's what I do. So that's why the Wallace pick here is impactful. I didn't really need it that much, but I did want to steal it from Justin because I knew that one of Justin's options, like, he wanted to kill with Lowen, but if you don't kill with Lowen, there's no really easy way to get the Sword Reaver to Hector in time. So he was actually really wanting Wallace over here, but I kind of stole it from him. So who did he pick? He picked Wrath. Wrath, kind of simple. There are a few strats that require just somebody with 7 move, in particular Battle Before Dawn. I think when he picked Wrath, he was thinking about Battle Before Dawn. His strat to get to Ursula on turn 4 and kill her, and then kill the Merc, requires that you have a unit with 7 move and Kanto. So Wrath was the only such unit left, except Priscilla. You could have picked Priscilla, but Wrath can do other things too. So speaking of Priscilla, Castle then picked Priscilla. For the same reason as above. He knows the same strat for Battle Before Dawn. Again, he's thinking, okay, what are all the chapters I have to do? He's solved pretty much every map, except Battle Before Dawn. In order to do his solution to Battle Before Dawn, he needs a unit with 7 move and Kanto. So he picks Priscilla, whom he can recruit because he gets Zerk. So these picks are going by much faster now. Luis. He picks Luis. So Luis is like the definition... Luis is similar to Lynn, where she's just a flunky. She does some random combat things here or there. In particular, in Sands of Time, she's pretty valuable to pick off units. Like, Sands of Time is basically a route map. It says defend. But the sooner you kill the enemies, the sooner enemies stop moving. So you just deploy Luis and help kill things, and she actually does pretty well. You generally don't want to deploy Luis and Pent in the same team, because part of the value of Luis is that she can die and you don't care. If you have Luis on the same team as Pent, if she dies, then Pent leaves, so you do care. So this was not a steal. Justin didn't really want Pent and Luis on the same team. Luis is valuable, but she's actually less valuable if you have Pent. So I didn't really see much of how Castle used Luis, but she's still strong for that reason. Okay, who did Justin pick? Fiora. So Justin picked Fiora. He was the only one of us 4 who had a strat to recruit her reliably. A lot of the problem with Fiora is she spawns and then she makes a stupid attack and just dies. Justin was the only one who had a strat that recruited her reliably. So Justin picked her. He said he's not going to fight with her. He's not going to use her as a carry. He's just going to use her to like pick up Pent in the desert if he needs to, because remember, sometimes Pent like gets damaged and leaves to heal and gets stuck. So you just pick up Pent and you like put him back in the fight. That's something she can do. She can like kind of help in Crazed Beast. Ended up promoting her, which was part of his strat. Like he does actually train Florina up to, or not Florina, Fiora up to promotion, and then she can just do a few more things. So she's kind of good. Okay, what did I pick next? I picked Will. So let me just go ahead and put like the last few picks on the board, because these are pretty much, we're getting to the end of the picks that matter. But I want to kind of explain what I did here with Will, because this was the last real play of the draft, was Will. So when I picked this unit, again, I was thinking of what's my strat, Hector to Hawkeye. I have these units to deal with the problem chapters. The only other problem chapter I didn't have a solution for was chapter 17. Okay, so what's my idea with chapter 17? If Hector's good, I Hector solo, and then I send Rebecca, and I send Will, Bartray, and Eliwood down to the bottom left to kill nomads. And they basically just make a series of cages, and I'm good to go. Well, what if Eliwood is good? If Eliwood's good, I want him to go north, but Bartray and Will alone can't deal with the nomads. There's one nomad reinforcement you can't block, and 3 of them spawn. My idea was, if I could get these 3 units, which are the last units you can get there, Guy doesn't count, you can't recruit Guy. You just run past him or silver lance him. My idea was, if I could get all of Bartray, Will, and Rebecca, then I can make 2 cages in the bottom left. And the first turn occurs, a nomad spawns, I attack him with Bartray, probably don't kill him. Second turn, a nomad spawns in the second cage, I kill the first nomad with Bartray. Third turn, the third nomad spawns in the first cage where the first one was, and then I'm solved. So my idea was I wanted Will and Rebecca. My mistake was picking Will first, because, again, if Mekkah goes and he doesn't pick the second archer, I'm golden. But I mistakenly thought that Mekkah would value Will higher than Rebecca, but I was kind of wrong. Mekkah thinks that Rebecca has like a non-zero contribution. Also, Rebecca rhymes with Mekkah, so he picked Rebecca. That was my mistake. If I'd picked Rebecca first, it was probably more likely that Will would have gotten back around to me. But that was the last one. So Mekkah picks Rebecca for similar reasons. She can block off nomads in that chapter. Also, she can sometimes shoot a Pegasus in chapter 13, which is an actual contribution. And the last thing is Harkin. Harkin is just a pick. He's kind of bad, but he's a risk mitigation pick in the sense that sometimes you're really weak against a particular boss like Denning or Limstella, and Harkin actually helps with that. Heath is actually fine against both, but all of the remaining units are just really bad. So speaking of really bad units, I'm just going to fill in the rest of the picks. Nino sucks, simply put. Dart is... Once upon a time, Dart was considered really good, but it's honestly just faster to take all his weapons away and let him die. So that's the fastest way to use Dart. That's the best way to have him save time, is to make him die as quickly as possible. Guy, like I said, hard to recruit. You simply can't get Matthew over there in time. Your strat for this map wins in 5 or 6 turns, so Guy either never moves or he gets a silver lance to the face. Who else did you pick? Jafar? Jafar, I think, is like maybe more reasonable, but he doesn't really do a whole lot. He like helps in the final map. That's it. He's kind of bad. So like these picks don't really matter. They're probably not going to do anything all run long. Varna, same reason, doesn't do anything. Legault, once upon a time our strats were fast enough to recruit Legault. This is not the case anymore. He's just he gets away. Usually Hector solo that map, and Hector does not reach the north in time for Legault. So by the way, when I say in time for, you're thinking, well, doesn't that mean your strats are slow? No, the strats are fast. They just take a lot of turns. One thing to mention is, like, high turn count does not mean slow, if not much goes on during the turns. It's speedrun, so like if nothing happens during a turn, you can skip like 2 or 3 turns in a row and you'll still be fine. Corel, some people are asking like why pick Corel here? The picks don't matter. That's why, like, why pick both Corel and Harkin? You're not going to recruit both. Frankly, Mekkah's probably not going to recruit either one. But even if there was value to recruiting both of them, or either of them, like, this is still good, because then, like, if you don't get Harkin, you still get Corel. Like, I don't really understand the idea of, like, you can only recruit one, so why would you draft both of them? Like, maybe, even if they were both valuable, you draft both of them so that you always get at least one. Okay, and then the last ones are, what, Canas, Renault... Canas, Renault, Lucius. Raven's super hard to recruit. Lucius is even harder to recruit. But Raven has to die off by chapter 26. Canas has a guide and you can't recruit him. Renault, I actually think, has like a non-zero value. But, because there's a strat with Justin. But remember Justin's double warp strat where you like warp to the north of Victory or Death, and then you carry Pent up there and then you warp a second time? You can actually recruit Renault during that process. We don't really know what to do with Renault from that point on, but we've solved the issue of his recruitment. But anyway, that's basically the picks. It's a longer video than I thought it was going to be, but once I make the cuts, it'll be that. Hopefully that answers a lot of the questions you guys had. But this has been pretty good. I'm going to upload this, but right now I'm stalling. If you have any questions, just post in the comments below. I'm happy to answer anything you have. Anyway, see you guys.